joining us today. And I'm Patty Brown. I think you all know that Denise Ada and I co-chair the Viewpoints Advisory Council and work with Nancy, Melody, Mercedes, and PJ on programming. And I could not be more excited about, as I said earlier, not only the substance, but also the timing of our opportunity with Casey today. It's funny. I think, although the International Women's Day has been observed for, I don't know, 100 years, right? Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could all agree that in view of the unique times that we're living in, the unprecedented times, that yesterday was probably the only time in the 100 years, but where I've actually spent time thinking about what the International Women's Day actually means, and what that organization, assuming it's an organization, I'm not even sure how all of that happens. But how they really attempted to focus us all on this very, very, very important opportunity to reflect on where we are as women, where the world is as women, and where all of us can spend time recognizing the social, economic, political, cultural achievements of women globally. But as we will talk about today, the real need for an increased call to action to really achieve gender parity. And so I have to say, I was in the car for much of this yesterday, having driven to Florida for my get out of COVID world. And I really did spend a lot of time thinking about the timing of the opportunity. And so indeed, Casey, you and I talked, and Denise talked about this last week, about change. And the Women's International Day of 2021, the theme was change comes from challenge, which I just love. Change comes from challenge. A challenged world is an alert world. And then to think about the focus of gender parity within a world that's also very, very focused on anti-racism, and really the need for parity across so many different, spectrums, if you will, of our culture. Today, to have you talk to us about not only your own efforts, but then your own passion around achieving the goals of the YWCA. So thank you for being with us. So we have a wonderful group of women here. Because it's a small group, I do hope that we can engage in dialogue. And I really wanted to suggest to you that there's two things we want to do. One, we want to understand you and your journey, both career-wise and also personally. And so I don't know how you like to tell your story, but there's the YWCA story, and then there's the Casey Harden story behind the YWCA story. And so please tell us if you'd like us to start with either journey, how you became, obviously so critically empowered as the deputy, what is your title? Deputy?
It's General Secretary.
General Secretary, yeah. So how that happened is an amazing story of just career build and will and achievement. But as I understand it, it was driven by something core to you as a person and your own background. So please start however you'd like with regard to those types of conversations.
Thanks, Patty. And thanks for the introductions. It's terrific to get a sense of all the women that I'm in the room with. And it is a privilege to be here. Really, although I'll be talking about, we'll be having a conversation, I also very much feel the privilege and the importance of really representing all the millions of women that are part of the YWCA movement, because when we talk about a network of women leaders, it is an enormous network that spans over 100 countries, and it's quite fantastic. So I just want to name them before I share a bit about me. When I talk about my work and the YWCA, and then my own story, I mean, at this point, they're inextricably intertwined. So I'll start with, I was working actually for Planned Parenthood. I was doing some clinical work, but also they had hired me because I did an internship at a very young age where they let me into the public school system out in the progressive Pacific Northwest to do, bodily autonomy and human sexuality education with high school kids. And so I was with Planned Parenthood, and I had a woman that is actually now one of my best friends. But at the time she said, there's a position at the YWCA in Pierce County, which is the county south of King County where Seattle is. She said, you have to apply, you're perfect for it. They really need someone to put together a STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math, which at that time was like the thing we were talking about as women, because the landmark study had come out from the American Association of University Women that empirically demonstrated that the experiences that girls and young women were having in STEM schooling, education, was completely different than the experience that boys and young men were having. And that was largely due to the behavior of those that were doing the educating. So they needed someone to put together a STEM program, and then also someone that could revive a number of health and wellness initiatives around cervical health and breast health and just general health for those that didn't have access to insurance. And it really was a good fit. But I kept saying, no, I'm not going to go to the.
Were you in your 20s?
I was 21 or 22.
Okay.
Yeah. So I kept saying, no, I am absolutely not going, because my knowledge at that point of the YWCA, which in the YWCA, for better or for worse, say it's like the best kept secret, but my knowledge of the YWCA was Jane Fonda, she did the jazzercise.
Yes.
Right. So I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, and my knowledge of the YWCA was the jazzercise team that was part of some, I don't know, 4th of July parade or something. And I said, no, that I have no place. I don't want to be doing jazzercise. But I finally went to the interview because I heard a little bit more about the executive director, and I was intrigued by what I understood to be her leadership. And I left the interview. I didn't go in with sweaty hands and a fast beating heart, but I left with sweaty hands, and my heart was beating fast. And I really felt as if I was on top of the world. The reason I share that story is because when I went, what I understood, which I didn't understand before the interview, is that the YWCA has a uniquely intersectional nexus combination within our mission, and has had it since 1946. And that is the belief that the elimination of racism is inextricably tied to addressing issues of sexism or empowering women. And so that takes me to the Casey part of the story, which is I was raised by fantastic parents all around, but my father, that I knew from a young age, and we were attached at the hip, was what we would call a feminist and also an anti-racist. I didn't know those words then. I only knew those words later in life. But that is the guidance, the principles, the philosophies in which he brought me up, and he demonstrated those by action. So with the feminism, you know, when I say he was a feminist, he wasn't spouting feminist theory to me, but everything he did by action was that of a feminist, or what I came to know as a feminist, or a empowered place or way in which a girl could walk through the world. And then in terms of anti-racism, I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, where then and now still issues of race, racial justice, racial injustice is really real. And he engaged in some, when I was a kid, in some issues that were going on in the educational system that was had very disparate outcomes. There was a lot of drawing the lines on schools, and he was part of really trying to take an active part in addressing that. And we also talked a lot about issues of race in our house, and that was back in the late 70s, early 80s. So that when I call him an anti-racist, I feel as if he really was doing everything to learn and grow and evolve as a man who didn't believe that that there should be racial injustice.
And I think you also share with me that you had a maternal grandmother who was a very important activist in her own right. So you want to tell us about her?
Yeah, funnily, the first time I really shared that was, I was the keynote speaker at the YWCA Greater Baltimore, one of our leader luncheons, which was a luncheon that for many years was so supported by women leaders, just really fantastic women leaders in Baltimore, and also women of the Center Club. So Yay. Yeah, right. Everything comes around.
Yes.
So I told that story from the stage of, I can't remember. There was a lot of unionization issues. So I remember at that time there were limited hotel options. But anyhow, from a hotel, I told the story of my great grandmother, Elsie, and she was in the Chicago area, and she married my great grandfather, and they very soon after they were married, she became pregnant, and she had twins, and she gave birth to the twins, and one twin took to breast milk, and the other twin did not. So my great grandmother, in really trying to navigate all the panic and the fear that came with that, had a really very overbearing mother-in-law. She describes her as, the family lore describes her as overbearing, but really where that overbearing came from was her mother-in-law's understanding of biblical text and what was sinful and what was not sinful, and what was sinful as it related to a woman's body. So as the twin was not thriving, and my great grandmother pursued options like animal milk and also breast milk, which was just becoming a thing, basically a point of commerce. She was very much shamed by her mother-in-law, and in the end, the weaker twin perished. And my great grandmother, as the story goes, packed up everything with the support of her husband, and within a week they had taken their belongings, largely musical instruments, and their new child, and relocated to Elkhart, Indiana. And where the story becomes really powerful and where it's related to the YWCA is that my great grandmother Elsie was driven by what had happened to her. And as I shared from that podium in Baltimore, instead of succumbing to her grief and to her fury at herself, at her mother-in-law, at the world, she grabbed all of it and actually became what we would call an activist, and did what women have done for centuries all around the globe, which is see a problem, and in their pain and in their fury and in their grief, tackle it. She walked around Elkhart and would approach women who were clearly pregnant and ask them if they had access to prenatal care and postnatal care. And in time, she actually convinced 3 or 4 physicians to start a clinic, a no-cost clinic that was available to anyone, those that could pay as well. But the point is that it was available to everyone in order to ensure that women had safe access in a factually accurate place that could be utilized by them regardless of what was going on in their personal life or their financial life, etc.
And what time would this have been?
Yeah, it's quite amazing to be the great granddaughter of Elsie.
And you're talking about,
and know that she started a YWCA in Elkhart, and she was one of the women. Yeah.
That is stunning. That is great. And so it's so interesting to have that background and then to have that opportunity. Can you all hear me?
I can't hear you, Patty. Does that mean you can't hear me?
I can hear you. PJ, others, can you all hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you, Patty, and Casey.
And Casey.
Casey, let us know when you can hear us. Casey? I'm going to chatter. Casey, can you hear us? We can hear you, right? And you all can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you. We can hear Casey too.
Can you hear us? All right, I just chatted with her. She says you cannot hear me. No, I think we can hear you. Hold on. Got to improvise when in the field. Say, Casey, say something. Casey, say something so we can test.
Hey, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear
Yes,
us?
you can. I just can't hear you.
Huh. Okay, well, unfortunately, that means, I'm going to say this,
a
unfortunately, hold on. Can you hear us? Fortunately, that means
Try
you will.
again. Oh, no, I can hear you.
Okay, we're going to keep squeezing in, and if for some reason,
Sorry. Yeah.
can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, well, let us know, and then unfortunately, that means you're just going to have to talk. If you can't hear me ask you questions. But let me go ahead, because what I was going to say is to have that background, and then at 2021 have that first, what it sounds like, your first job interview, just enthuse you with such passion. Tell us what happened next, because you took that one job, and then, oh my God, the way your career just went one step, and now you're sitting in Switzerland.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think my YWCA trajectory was largely defined by the women that I had the luck, the blessing to work with. When I was in Pierce County, the executive director, I was with Julie Anderson. She really, the way I describe it and what I remember now when I think about the leadership of young women is she opened every door. And if I chose to or wanted to step through it, she had my back 100%. I remember at that time, United Way had changed their funding structure like they do. Yeah. And at that time, we had an opportunity to pitch new innovative ideas because they were on a path of, their current path of innovation. And we had to petition at the same time to United Way, but also to the city of Tacoma and the Pierce County, the same idea, because we needed everyone to agree to it. And that was to extend the shelter stay in our big domestic violence shelter from 30 days to 90 days, because all the data and anecdotes recognize that 30 days is just frankly not long enough for a woman to basically rebuild her life in the shelter. And Julie let me do it. She said, do you want to do it or do you want me to do it? And she let me stand in front of the United Way. She let me stand in front of the city, and she let me stand in front of the county. So I had pivotal moments like that as I went from the YWCA of Pierce County and decided after 9/11 that I really wanted to be back on the East Coast. And my dad had also been berating me and saying, oh, he was very much baiting me and berating me and saying,
come back.
He would say, oh, I bet it's really easy for you to be doing this racial justice and empowerment of women work out in the progressive Northwest. He said, oh, why don't you come back to Maryland, just south of the Mason-Dixon line? Why don't you try this work here? So anyhow, whether he was right or not, it was quite a challenge. So I came back and worked in Annapolis, and then was recruited to the YWCA Greater Baltimore by a woman who kept saying, we really want you here. It was like a 3 or 4 month campaign. And I was so excited when I started in Baltimore. And I actually was sorry to leave Baltimore, but I had identified that I really wanted to be the executive director of the YWCA Mid-Atlantic region, which was a executive position to provide leadership to over 40 YWCAs from, I don't know, part of, I can't remember now, Pennsylvania down to Tennessee. And the fantastic leader there, Ruth Irving Carroll, one of my significant mentors, She retired early, and so I left Baltimore early than I ever wanted to. And then from there, I was part of a small group of YWCA leaders that felt that the YWCA USA needed to come back together and be re-centralized. There was work that only a national office could do in fundraising and visibility and advocacy, because we were decentralized into these regions. And it was a really powerful couple of years, worked with, again, just always learning all along the way from incredible, risk-taking, smart women leaders. And we successfully planned and worked ourselves out of our jobs as regional execs. And I was lucky enough to, yeah, I was lucky enough to be hired at YWCA USA, where I, with some colleagues, was part of centering racial justice back in the YWCA work. It was a 4.5-year process, and then I was ready actually to leave the YWCA, and had some ideas about what I wanted to do, and then had an opportunity to go to the World office, and I took it.
Wow. Oh, of course you did. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but the theme is that the other women I worked with, and it was women who weren't paternalistic. They took risk to let me do what I wanted to do, and I also would say that if I decided I wanted to do something outside of my job, they let me do it with no assurance that it would have a meaningful outcome. And they gave up territory, and I still say that there's something in the water on the East Coast that I experienced at the YWCA. Just incredible women leaders who were very visionary about what it looks like to support other women leaders.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and unfortunately we only have an hour, but as I think through the audience, the folks that I know are on the line today, and how they introduce themselves, obviously all women leaders, all committed to not-for-profit organizations to try to drive change in our communities. And then your background, we could have an hour discussion just on how women support each other.
Yeah.
And how mentors are critically important to us as leaders, as people, as committed, passionate women trying to make a difference in our world. We could have a discussion around how you organize not-for-profits so as to have them much more effective, which is what it sounds like you did within the Y work.
Yes.
And how hard that is. Those of us that have chaired organizations and looked and solved problems functionally. Around barriers to actually achieving mission. Right. And then we can have a conversation about the actual work and the commitment that the Y has around what it's been, working on for so many years, which is probably what we should next turn to, because the activity that the Y has been involved in for, how many years has the Y been around?
1855 is when there was first any.
But before we do that, does anybody have any questions of Casey regarding her pathway and the Y specifically? Because I'd like, if not, I do want to reserve time at the end for questions regarding really the mission of the work.
Well, I'd just say it's just a totally amazing story.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, PJ, thank you for that. But to have the power of partners, it sounds like the women leaders at the Y walk the walk as individuals.
Yeah, I think that it's a foundational principle. I think it's written differently and depending on the region of the world or the focus of the work, but absolutely, it's very pluralistic in nature as well. So that's really baked into, that pluralism is baked into the World YWCA bylaws and constitution. And then there's certainly a domino effect that takes place to really set the stage. I mean, it's interesting because probably in the last couple of years internationally, there's certainly been a lot of discussion about localization, so really focusing on leaders within community who absolutely know what needs to be done. It's just an issue of resources and the tension with the fact that there are very big organizations that have the resources that are part of certain systems. So all of that conversation that I know is, you know, happening in actual countries and nations, but also internationally. It's been very interesting to be part of a global network of women who have had that wisdom going back for more than a century, and have had it baked into, as I said, the legal documents actually, in order to sustain essentially that principle and that knowledge. Yeah.
So talk to us about the differences and similarities in the issues that women face, both from your experiences in the various places that you've worked, but now sitting on the global side of it all. What are the modern, if you will, challenges that we all across the globe face? And then what are some of the unique challenges based on geography?
Sure. So common challenges that I now know to be true in real time. I certainly know it from reading and studies and books and the wisdom of people that basically have access to the pulpit. That's a metaphorical pulpit. Really, violence against women. Just never-ending, insidious violence against girls, young women, and women manifests in all across the globe, in every country, in various ways. And I would really challenge. I think there are a few exceptions where systems have changed in such a way that that violence against women has been mitigated, but it is as I say, a scourge on humanity.
Definitely.
Climate change, it's not universally acknowledged as a women's issue, but I would absolutely argue that climate change is an issue for girls, young women, and women everywhere. Because as we experience the impact of climate change, those impacts are felt the most by girls, young women, and women. And so, you know, it's interesting. In 2007, I think I was at an international meeting in Zurich hosted by the YWCA, and the entire, it was very eye-opening for me as a woman from the United States to have a multi-day conference with the red thread throughout the entire conference was that climate change was a women's issue. And here we are about 10 years, maybe exactly 10 years later, and it's not something that we're seeing.
Can you talk a little bit more specifically, connect the dots for me?
Sure. So I'll take for example our YWCA in Zimbabwe, which is being even more ravaged by natural disasters due to climate change. The women are already operating are already feeling disproportionately the ill effects of the political, economic, and social systems within that country. The same can be said for probably some of the communities that border the Gulf of Mexico right here in the United States. I have no doubt that if we look at the demographics, they will show the disproportionality of all those metrics and how they're negative for women. So when climate change comes to bear, the impact, the disruption on those that are already the most marginalized or vulnerable is felt even more greatly, which leads me to really issue of whether it's by caste or by ethnicity or culture, any group that is marginalized within their context. And in the United States, we certainly know that to be true for Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of color. The impact is just felt more greatly. I mean, it's, I guess, salt in the wound would be a good saying. And again, if we're talking about some of the communities that border the Gulf of Mexico, in the United States, and when the hurricanes hit, we know that that is going to have a disproportionate negative impact on Black and brown women. So that reality, that intersectional reality where those two identities or more come to pass, that's shared by women all around the world.
Yeah, fascinating.
So,
Other issues, other common issues.
yeah, I mean, SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights. I mean, that to me, sometimes I frame that as the other side of the coin for violence against women. Women having full agency over the decisions of their body, or even if you want to really more broadly understand SRHR, also their family, the decisions that they make. We have seen, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, real reversals and digressions and losses in the protections that women have as it comes to their bodily autonomy. I mean, everything's moving in the very wrong direction.
Is that right?
And that is right. And there's data to support it. And then not, I don't think it's understood as a shared concern, but as we deal with the ravages of climate change, social and political upheaval due to some of these regressions and populist movements in countries and democratic overturning or pluralistic governing upheavals, we are seeing a lot of migration and refugees, and that is a reality that is not going in a direction towards stabilization, but in fact greater increasing, and we're seeing it, and it's all very much interrelated, again, and especially to climate change. As a whole, communities are devastated by these things that are happening in terms of the climate.
That is such a great fundamental reframing of what I think we would usually think about when we just hear gender parity as the goal, right? You just reframed it in such a large and important way. Questions about that from anyone? It's fascinating.
Yeah,
no, but I did want to make a comment. I really like the way that you connected that to the Gulf, like Hurricane Katrina. I think that really brings it home. And just recently in Texas, where they had the Great Freeze, and when we look at the households of the people who actually perish as a result of, a drop in temperature below zero, what impact that had on so many marginalized communities, and impacted mostly women, because most of those households were led by women. And so that really brought it home. We said climate change. I was like Patty, I said, make the connection for me. How is that impacting women? But that's very insightful.
Very insightful. And so tell us a little bit about how the Y is thinking about addressing these things and some of the key priorities, key initiatives.
Yeah. So when I talked about the kind of principles or foundational personality of the YWCA, it is set up so that it is a global network of women leaders that are able to respond uniquely to the needs of their community. That's in the United States, and that's also in every community around the globe. There's a lot of autonomy that YWCAs have that you do not see, and it's not part of the governance structure of other federated or affiliated organizations. So knowing that, and that being the reality, and us believing very clearly that that is an effective way, supporting local women leaders in the work they do is the way forward, the way to affect change for good, the way to achieve sustainable development goals. We do have a collective vision that every YWCA supports, and that's around young women's leadership, and the belief that when with following the bold and often inspired leadership of young women as different generations move into those, that particular leadership role. Again, getting behind them is creating, it is a sure bet to ensure a change for good, to ensure advocacy and policy that's relevant and responsive and courageous. So that focus on young women's leadership is supported by, that is what we do with the World YWCA. Besides trying to raise money and visibility for all the incredible work of leaders all around the globe, we right now are focusing on our goal 2035, which is 100 million young women transforming power structures. And we have a few methodologies. We have our Rise Up program, which is customizable to, and it was developed by and for young women over the years. It's going through another phase right now. We want to make sure it's relevant and responsive. But it's really the premise that if the YWCA, or when the YWCA creates space for women leaders, including young women and girls, they naturally pick up a torch and they carry it and do really critical work in areas that are needed.
Wow. Talk a little bit more about the Change for Good concept and how you, beyond the YWCA, see women organizing so as to accelerate those goals.
So I'll start with talking about young women again. I mean, I think one of the great conversations that's happening right now, and there's a lot of data to support it, is the power of movements. So the YWCA has always called itself a movement, and our autonomy that I spoke of before has really allowed for us to function as a movement, kind of this organic amoeba that's being very responsive and very resilient to whatever's happening. And I think as governments around the world are letting down the too many citizens, those that are marginalized, and as too many countries are moving away from a pluralistic approach to government and to citizenship, I think we are seeing movements really propagating in different places. And if you look around, as has been the case throughout history in regions all over the world, women are often the ones that are the first to shout and to say, this is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that. I mean, there are moments when at the end of the day, I think, why in the world am I doing this work? I could be owning a pet training, a dog training, farm out, where people pay me lots of money to train their dogs. I'm really good at that.
Oh, really?
And all I have to do to check myself is to look at some of the women leaders that I follow in South and Latin America and Central America, and to see them raising their torch against all odds in the most unsafe, oppressive settings, and dying because of it, being violated because of it. It really reminds me that we must do this work. If we want to affect change, if we want to reach parity or safety or eliminate violence against women, or
Save the world.
Or really achieve better results of racial justice or break down systems of oppression that exist everywhere, that it's really women that I can get behind. It's women. And I don't mean to take anything away from men, but I hope I don't have to explain that and defend that right now.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah.
That's amazing. Is your father still alive?
He is not.
No. Well, I'm sure he is just amazingly proud of you.
Yeah.
And that's just wonderful. So we have about 15 more minutes, maybe 10, 12 minutes. I'd love to open it up for the group. There's so many things that we touched on, but your summary, I can't speak for everybody, but my assumption is that 100% of the women that are on this call have recognized the power of empowering women together in community. So please, anyone, just how do we move? Charmaine, is that you?
Yes, hi.
Go ahead,
I wanted
please.
to, thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about trauma and what you guys are seeing in the YWC, or what initiatives or programs. I currently serve as the chair of the Baltimore City Women's Commission Health, Education, and Equity Committee, and we are seeing generational bouts of trauma and the effects of the trauma playing out. I know recently Mayor Scott has initiated a new task force on trauma. So what is the Y's position on trauma that's affecting women, like you said, multi-generational trauma that's trickling down?
So two things come to mind. One is that I think, particularly in the United States, but also in other regions, this acknowledgement of trauma is taking on more and more and more traction. And I see it taking on more and more traction in one of two ways. One is in a very clinical way. So folks that are doing work around programming and activities and services that are intentional and evidence-based, really for like 5-10 years now, really a strong push and a strong movement to imbue all of that with trauma-informed care and trauma-informed approaches. And that, again, I'll call that kind of the academic clinical side of what you said, Charmaine. And then also, particularly over the last year and a half, for far more people than ever before, because of social media, there have been these pivot moments, right? These turning points. George Floyd was one. The murder of George Floyd, for instance, in the United States, was one that got the attention of so many people that otherwise, where the conversations that were already being had and the work that was being done was just more like noise. So it just brought it to the fore for everyone. And with the dialogue that comes with a moment like that, the trauma that puts particularly on the individuals that have been trying to do the work or are doing the work, or that experience are on the receiving end of that oppression every day, that conversation, that human conversation, that spiritual conversation, that mental health conversation is very much, I think, moving into what I'll call the mainstream. And when I say mainstream, I mean, if I go to the sidelines of a little league game or a football game or a orchestra showing somewhere in the city of Baltimore or in Baltimore County, there's a likelihood that I could pick up a conversation about trauma with at least 50 to 75% of the people. That's what I mean when I say mainstreaming. So I think it's really real. And I think it's for me, I see it's like almost a chicken or the egg or a catch-22, because when you start talking about those issues of trauma, we go deeper into the issues itself. It's almost like really acknowledging and acknowledging oppression, and also holding people accountable that may not understand it or believe it, holding them accountable for it. And I have, you know, I was on a panel about a month and a half ago, and it was 6 or 7 leaders of women's organizations within the United States. I was the only international representative, and without exception, every leader talked about their concern for the Black and brown women that were doing the work right now around these issues. So it's
Well, and
really,
I would think COVID is going to exacerbate the implications of trauma. Wouldn't you agree, particularly for the young kids?
Do you mean, Patty, that as this generation, some are calling it generation disrupted or generation COVID, as they come up, the trauma that they'll experience, or that
I mean, I am reading a little bit about that there's some fears that, you know, just a year of a lack of engagement, you know, will have some serious impacts for certain ages.
Yeah, I mean, sure. So internationally, we certainly know that's to be true. I mean, female genital mutilation, mutilation, and child marriage. The numbers have skyrocketed over the last year. I mean, when I talked earlier about digression or regression,
Yeah.
because and what a lot of what COVID has shown is really incredibly, and I hate to sound like a Debbie Downer, but really, in too many instances, the progress made for and by girls, young women, and women around the world is very fragile.
Yeah. Charmaine, did you want to follow up on that?
No, I'm fine. I think when we're looking at trauma, the COVID trauma, I was thinking was a different piece. The trauma that I was speaking of is the sexual abuse, the domestic abuse, the alcoholism, the socioeconomic factors also. But I think, hearing this today puts a lot of things into perspective. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to be on a panel with other women in the wine industry from all over the world. And we really, it was eye-opening to me to find out that there is sexualization of women sommeliers and women wine experts, and some of the women, it was an International Women's Day panel, and they shared about the abuse, so these are, functioning, we're what we would call societies, and just to hear them about how, they were taken advantage of, when they go to the conferences that, they are being fed alcohol by the men, and then the men take sexual abuse, or the men were supplying drugs. And that's not something that you would associate with the wine industry, so women, it's very true that being a woman in any profession, right now, like you said, our protections, are really are leaving, our rights, our reproductive rights, those types of things. So thank you so much. I found this really eye-opening, and I'm looking to share your insight with my circle. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Charmaine.
Charmaine. Others?
Thanks for sharing that experience, Charmaine.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of experiences around social injustice, talking to people in major corporations. And as you know, people are very focused on diversity and inclusion, and also employee resource groups where they're telling the narratives of different and diverse individuals. Are there any takeaways or any call to action that you have for major corporations?
And I would add nonprofits. I would add nonprofits to that, because we're in the same space. Thank you, Sharetta, for asking that, because we are working around messaging and how, particularly serving underserved women. We want to make sure that we're in the right space there. So I would add nonprofits.
Absolutely.
So I chuckled, not to be dismissive, but because we could have, oh boy, I would love to have another conversation about your very question. And I guess I would say my response, is it Sharita or Sharetta?
Sharetta.
Sharetta. So my response, what's that?
Like Loretta, my family's.
Oh, perfect. Okay, Sharetta. Thanks. It's important I get the pronunciation right, something that I really value now. I'm working in the international sector. So Sharetta and Lynn, I think I'm pretty okay. My response to you is actually distinctly different. So, and it's, there's no way I can give a great, a solid, comprehensive response, but I'd be happy to talk offline. I mean, before I came to World YWCA, like I said, I was with the YWCA USA network, and we have centered racial justice work for 25 years. And one of the benefits of, I mean, I've been there for 25 years. It's been since 1946. But one of the benefits of that is seeing over the years how talking about systems of oppression, racial issues of racial injustice have really played out over the years, and people trying to do this and trying to do that Right now, I know a lot of the keywords are diversity, inclusion for corporations. I can see that in the news cycle and certain news cycles. And, you know, I think fundamentally there's always so far a problem, because in order to really do that work in a corporation, you have to take it apart. People, you're asking the very people in power to let go of that power, to let go of that privilege, if they really want to own up to it and have those conversations. And I don't think right now our humanity is hardwired to do that and do it naturally. So what I would say is that I think the best thing that can happen is sustained sharing and listening. I also very much believe, so that addresses issues of bias and prejudice, and maybe changes hearts and minds so that people from their individual place affect change. But I also personally very strongly believe that change doesn't happen until you also address institutional and systemic issues. And that takes bold leadership. It takes someone that lasts long enough and says, this is how we're going to affect change. And I'd love to talk about it offline, but I don't think it's an easy answer. And and then I'm sorry for Lynn, you are in a whole nother world, because you're part of a system that says you walk the talk, and often we are not walking the talk at all. And that deconstruction is a whole nother animal. And I'd be happy to talk offline too.
Well, I got to tell you something. I can't believe it's already 1 o'clock. And PJ, knowing that you've been a leader of empowering women for your whole life, and knowing that you have brought the opportunity to the Center Club for us to continue to think about how we as Center Club members can be more active in change, particularly in our communities. I think there's another Casey Harden Zoom to be scheduled because this conversation should and must continue. And I hope, Casey, you'd be willing to come back. We can talk offline about specific focuses, but I'm seeing a series in my mind. PJ, you want to close us out?
Well, I don't, not necessarily close you out, but I couldn't agree more that, and quite frankly, what I was thinking is, how often do you get to the United States, Casey?
Before COVID, I got back 5 to 10 times a year-ish.
Yeah, I mean, I'm perfectly happy and would welcome a second Zoom. However, I'd really love you, as things improve and continue to improve with the vaccination rollout and so forth, if we could have you in person.
Come to the club. It would be fabulous.
I'd love that.
Yeah.
Great.
It would be terrific. And this has been spectacular.
Listen, thank you. Thank you all for participating. I want to be respectful of your time. Casey, a real privilege to meet you. Congratulations on all of the achievements that you've had to date. And I'm very happy to know that you're leading the way, because the Y is going to continue to have amazing impact. And as you say, call to action, change for good, International Women's Month. All of this aligns very well to what we must be leading, critical change in our for our children and for our future. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you soon.
It was a